Welcome back everyone, and welcome to part 2 of this Blender tutorial series where we're creating this pizza slice. So this is part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, then definitely check that out. I will have a link in the description to the tutorial playlist. So in part 1, we sculpted the pizza crust and the pizza sauce and the cheese, and in this part we're going to be setting up the lighting, and then we're going to be creating procedural materials for all 3 of these objects. And speaking of procedural materials, I did want to let you know real quick about my Blender procedural material packs. So I create material packs of 10 realistic procedural materials created with Blender's procedural nodes. So the links are in the description if you'd like to check those out. And purchasing the procedural material packs is also a great way to help support me and this channel. And if you'd like to learn how to create all of my procedural materials, then you can also check out my Blender procedural material tutorial playlist on YouTube. Again, the links are in the description. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to press the A key to select these objects, and then using the object context menu, I'm going to shade them smooth, and that way they will be smooth and you can't see those little vertices there. So I now want to add a camera, so I'm going to press Shift A, and let's go right down here and we're going to add a camera. Now I want to place the camera right about here, so I'm just going to navigate to about here, and then I can press Control Alt Numpad 0, and Control Alt Numpad 0 is going to bring the camera to where we are. Now, if you click on the camera, just make sure it's selected by clicking right up here, and you go over to the camera settings, the object data properties. I want to turn the focal length up because I think it looks a bit nicer if the focal length is higher. So on the focal length of the camera, I'm going to turn this up to like a 90. And that way things are going to be a little bit more flat and zoomed in a little bit. So now what I'm going to do is press G to grab. That's going to bring the camera around. But then I'm going to double tap the Z key, and that is going to bring the camera in and out. So I'm just going to bring the camera up like this. And then I also want to click right over here on the output properties, and I want to use a square image. So on the resolution right here, on the X and Y resolution, I'm just going to click and then drag down and let go, and then I can change both of the values at the same time, and I'm going to use a resolution of 1920 by 1920. So now it is a square image. Of course you can use whatever resolution you want, but I like using a square image. So I'm now going to press G to grab, and then G and double tap the Z key. That's going to bring the camera in and out. I can bring it in, and I can also double tap the R key, and that is going to enable the trackball rotation, and then I can also hold down the Shift key to make my movements more sensitive. Just press G to grab and just kind of move that camera around until it's somewhere where you like. And then I also don't need the timeline, so I can just close it. So I'm going to hover my mouse right here when the crosshair appears. I can click, drag up, and then drag down, and then let go, and that'll close the timeline just so we have a little bit more space. Let's press Control S again to save. So I'm now going to be doing the lighting before I do the materials, and why I'm doing the lighting first is so that then we'll have some really nice lighting so that it'll be easier to preview the materials. So I'm first going to go right over here to the world, and then over here on the world, just click on the new button if you haven't already added in a new world. There should be a world on default, and then I want to add in the environment texture that I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial. So right here on the color, I'm going to click on this yellow dot, and then I want to change this to environment texture under texture. Alright, and then I can click on open to open up the HDRI. And again, link is in the video description if you'd like to download the same HDRI that I'm using. So I'm going to be using the Pillars 1K HDRI, and this is from polyhaven.com. So I'm going to click on this, and then I can click on open image. Now to preview this, I'm going to hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view so that I can preview that lighting. And then I don't want Blender to render everything around here. I just want it to render what the camera can see. So in the camera view, I'm going to press Control B, and then I'm going to click and drag a box around the camera and let go. And that way the preview times will render a little bit faster because it's only going to render what the camera can see. Now I also want to add some lights. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to go up here to Mesh, and I'm going to add a circle. Let's hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view. So I'm going to be adding some circle lights, and then I'm going to be adding an emission material to them. So the material will be emitting light, and that's how I'm going to light up the scene. Now, if you're using Blender EV, then it would be better to press Shift A and go right down here to light, and I would just add like an area light instead, because in Blender EV, the emissions don't actually emit light. They do appear as though they're emitting light, but they're not actually going to work well for lighting up another object. So if you're using Blender EV, I would just use like an area light, but if you're using Cycles render like I am, then you can just use this light. So I'm going to press G to grab and bring it up on the Z-axis like that. And then I'm going to press the Tab key to go into edit mode. And then I can press the F key, and the F key is going to fill a face. So then I can tab to go back to object mode. And then I'm going to press the 7 on the numpad, and that is going to take me to top view. And I can press G to grab, and I'm just going to bring this light over kind of to about here. And then I can also press 1 on the numpad, and that's going to take me to front view, and I can bring this up a bit. And then I'm going to press R to rotate. Let's rotate this up. And then I can also press 7 on the numpad for top view, and I can press R to rotate, and let's rotate this over. And then I can scale it up a little bit. All right, so we now have this light, maybe bring it up a little bit more, rotate that over. So it's just pointed right there at the pizza. So now I need to add a material. So let's click right over here on the material properties, click on the new button, and I can just rename this to light 1. All right, so now on the surface right here, I want to click on this, and I don't want it to be the principled shader. So I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to instead change it to the emission shader. So it's actually going to be emitting light. And then let's press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view. I can hold down the Z button and go into the rendered view and let go, just to preview how that's looking. Now it's not very strong, so I'm going to take the strength value right here, and I'm going to turn this way up to like a strength of 200. Now that might look a little bit blown out, and it might look a little bit too bright, but once we add materials, it's going to be darker because the default material in Blender is just a white color, so it's reflecting the light a lot. And then I also want to go right here to the color, and I want to make this a very, very slightly yellow color. Now I also want the background to be transparent because I don't want to see the background. So let's click right up here on the render properties, and I'm going to go down here and open up the film tab. And then I'm going to click on the transparent button, and now the background is set to transparent. And then also while we're here, I'm going to go down to the color management, and I'm going to set the view transform to filmic. And then also on the look here, I'm going to set this to high contrast, and the high contrast look will pop out the colors and make things more saturated and contrasty, and it'll make the final scene look nicer. All right, so I'm now going to hold down the Z button and go back into the solid view, and then I can press the 7 on the numpad to go to top view. So I now want to create some rim lights over here, and rim lights are just going to add a little bit of bright light kind of on the corner. So in the camera view, it's just going to add a little bit of light kind of right here, and that'll just help to pop out the object and make it look separate from the background. So I'm going to take this light, just make sure it's selected, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's bring it down here. And then I'm also going to press Alt R, and Alt R is going to clear the rotation values. I'll press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I can just kind of bring this up, and I'm going to bring it level with the pizza. And then I'm going to scale this light down because I do want it to be smaller, so press S to scale that down. So I can now press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate this up so it's pointed right there at the pizza. And then I can also press the 7 on the numpad for front view. I can bring this over, so press G to grab and just stick it right there, maybe bring it back a little bit. So it's just pointed at the pizza. And then I want to have one more, so let's press 7 on the numpad for top view again. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate and R to rotate, and then I'm going to bring my view down here, and then I can press R to rotate again and maybe S to scale, and we'll scale this up a little bit. And I also want to bring this one down a little bit, so I'm going to press the 1 on the numpad to go to front view. I can press G to grab and just bring that down and rotate it up a little bit, so it's just going to be pointed at the pizza. Let's press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and this light right here, I'm also just going to scale it up a little bit, and I'm going to press G to grab, bring it back on the x-axis a little bit, just like that. All right, let's go into the rendered view and see how that is looking. So now if I zoom in there, you can see that there's a little bit of a brighter light right there on the edge of the pizza, and that is what I want. So we can now create the procedural materials for the pizza. So I'm going to click right over here on the shading tab, and in the shading tab we have the 3D view here. I'll press the 0 on the numpad to go into the camera view, and then we also have the shader nodes right here. So I'm just going to make this smaller so we have more space, and I can also hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view just so that we can preview the rendered view. And I'm going to select the pizza crust, and you can see we already have the crust material. And I'm also going to press Control B in the camera and then drag a box here and that is going to add a boundary just right there. So I can zoom in there and it'll just render this area, so the render will be a little bit faster in the preview. All right, so now let's create the procedural material. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to start by searching for a noise texture, and let's drop the noise texture right down here. Now I am going to be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview different nodes, so if you don't have the add-on enabled, you can just click right up here on Edit, and then you can open up the preferences. And then right over here on the add-ons tab, if you go to the search right up here, you can search for the Node Wrangler, and then just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So you can just close the user preferences. So now that the Node Wrangler is enabled, I can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node on the object. And then also another feature of the Node Wrangler is if you select a texture, you can press Control T, and that is going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. Now I don't need the mapping, so I'm just going to select the mapping node and press X to delete it, and I'm going to bring the texture coordinate over. Now I do want to use the object coordinates on the texture coordinate, so let's plug the object into the vector, and the object coordinates is going to place the texture on the object more evenly. And then let's play around with the noise texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 4, so it's a bit smaller, and then I also want it to be very detailed, so let's turn the detail all the way to the max, which is 15. And then I also want there to just be a little bit more roughness, so let's take the roughness value and turn that up to just like a 0.6, so there's a little bit more roughness. Alright, so this is a pretty cool texture for the crust, but it's just black and white right now. So to change the colors, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here. I'm going to start to type in color, and we're going to add the color ramp node. Let's click on the color ramp, and I'm going to drop it right in here so the factor of the noise texture can go into the color ramp. So I can now change these colors, and then we can make it look more like pizza crust. So I'm going to first click on the white tab, and I'm going to click right here, and I'm going to make this kind of a light brown color. So kind of an orangey yellowish color, kind of a tannish color, and then a little bit darker. And if you'd like to use the exact same color that I'm using, then you can click over on the hex value, and you can put in a hex value of 9B5737. That is the exact color that I'll be using. And let's also click right here, and this tab right here, this is going to be a lighter brown. So let's go here to the color. I'm going to make this much brighter, and then I'm going to make it kind of a light tannish, kind of breadish color. And again, if you want to use the same color that I'm using, right here on the hex value, you can type in a hex value of E7B677. So that is the exact bread color that I'll be using. And then I also want the bread to be a little bit more contrasty, so I'm going to click on this tab, and I'm just going to drag it out a little bit, and when I drag it out, now you're able to see it a little bit better. Alright, so I can now take the color, and let's plug this into the base color, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled BSDF to preview that. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like pizza crust. Now to make it look a little bit more like bread and like food, I want to add a little bit of subsurface scattering just to allow a little bit of light to go through the object. So on the subsurface right here, I'm just going to change this to like a 0.1, and that way it's going to be a little bit more soft and let a little bit of light through. And then on this subsurface color right here, I want to make this pretty bright, and I want to make it a red color, so red light is going to go through. Now I also want this pizza crust to look nicely cooked and make it look a little bit toasty. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for the geometry node. Let's click on the geometry node and put it right here. And I'm going to be using the pointiness value to do this. Now the pointiness value unfortunately doesn't work in Blender Eevee, so if you're using Blender Eevee, you might just want to skip this step. What you could do is kind of use this color ramp, maybe make some of the colors a little bit darker if you're using Blender Eevee, but I'm using cycles, so I'm going to use the pointiness value. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp because we're going to need to make the pointiness value more contrasty because it's actually kind of hard to see. So I'm going to put the color ramp right here, and then I'm going to take the pointiness value from the geometry node, and let's put that into the color ramp. And then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So you can see it's very hard to see the pointiness value, and that's because it's just very gray. It's not very contrasty. So I'm going to drag these values together, and as we drag them together, you're going to be able to see that much better. So I'm going to drag these really close, and now you can really see what that's looking like. And make sure you are in the rendered mode when you're doing this, because if you're in the material preview, then it's not going to show the pointiness values. And one other thing that you could do, if you're using Blender Eevee and you do really want to use the pointiness value, you could create this color ramp and then you could bake that as an actual texture, and then you could take the baked texture and switch it over to Eevee, and then you could use this instead of the pointiness and the color ramp. Just an idea of something you could do if you really want to use this, but you want to use Blender Eevee. Alright, so I'm going to drag these together even more so that it's very contrasty. So something like that, so you can see this is going to be a very nice texture to make the crust look like it's been nicely cooked and toasted. So I now want to mix this color ramp in with the original color. So we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on, so what I can do is just select this color ramp, hold down the Shift key, and then select this color ramp, and then I can press Control 0. And when you press Control 0, that is going to add a mix RGB. Let's just click on this arrow to open this up. So it's going to add the mix RGB and plug them both up. Now this is just a black and white map, so I actually want to take this color and I want to put it here in the factor. And then I want this bottom color ramp to actually be going up into color 1. So the bottom color ramp here with the original texture, that's going to go into color 1. And then this one here is going to go into color 2 as the factor. So the factor is telling it what parts are going to be color 1 and what parts are going to be color 2. Now I want to click on the mix right here, and I want to instead change this to darken, so it's going to make those values darker. And then for color 2, this is going to be the toasty brown, kind of reddish color. So I'm going to make it kind of a brownish reddish color and make it a bit darker and make it even more saturated and even more red. And you can really see now that pizza crust is looking very toasted because we are adding this kind of reddish brownish color. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using on color 2, you can go to the hex value and you can type in a hex value of 732B02. So now that looks very nicely toasted, and if I Control Shift and select the principled BSDF, all we need to do now is take this color and replace it right in here for the base color, and now we have a much more nicely toasted pizza crust. Now it is still a little bit hard to see. If I turn the subsurface down, you're able to see it a little bit better, but one way to be able to see that toasted areas a lot better is to add some data into the normal to give it some bump. Because right now it's very smooth and the subsurface is also making it look even more smooth, but if we add some data into the bump, then it's going to be more rough. So what I'm going to do is take this color right here and let's put the color into the normal from the darken, from the mix RGB. Then I need to convert this to normal data because this is color data, but this needs to be normal data. So to convert the color data to normal data, we can press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a bump node. Let's click on the bump node, and I can drop it right in here in this wire, and that's going to plug it up. I want color 2 to actually be going into the height value, and that way it's going to convert color data into normal data. So then the normal from the bump can go into the normal of the principled BSDF. Now this is pretty strong, so on the strength value, I'm just going to turn the strength down to like a 0.6, so it is less strong, and that is looking really nice. Now I also want to give this spread just a lot more noise and bump. So I'm going to go right over here to this noise texture. I'm going to select the noise texture, and then I'm going to press Control Shift D. So if you press Shift D, that will duplicate nodes, but if you press Control Shift D, that will duplicate the node, but it'll keep the wires plugged up to it. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now I do want to change one of the values. I'm just going to take the roughness and I'm going to turn this down to like a 0.5, so it's not quite as rough. And then what I can do is I can plug this into the normal. So I'm going to take the bump node, I'm going to select the bump node, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to drop it right here. So because this first bump node has already converted this to normal data, the normal can go through the normal, but we can now take this extra noise texture and we can plug the factor into the height value of the second bump. So I can Control Shift and select this bump, you can see that bump data, and then I can Control Shift and select this one, and you can see we have more bump. So I can Control Shift and select the principled BSDF, and let's just bring that over, bring the material output over here, and you can now see how that's looking, so it's looking much more toasted. So let's now take the strength value of this bump, and I just want to make it a little bit less strong, so I'm going to change it to like a 0.4. Now the crust is also a little bit shiny, so I want to make it less shiny. So let's take this this color here from the darken, and I'm going to put this into the roughness. Now I want to play around with this because right now it's actually looking even more shiny. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. Let's click on this color ramp, and I'm going to drop it right in here between the darken and the roughness. So now I can just play around with these colors to make it more rough. So if I make the colors more white, they are going to be more rough. So I'm going to click on this black color right here, and I'm going to turn it up, and as I turn it up, you can see it is more rough. Now I don't want it to be super rough, but I do want it to be much more rough, so I'm going to make it kind of just like a gray color. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using on the hex value, you can type in A2, A2, A2. And then I do want the crust to just look a little bit more toasted, so I'm going to Control Shift and select the darken so I can preview it. So I can drag these values, and you can see that we're going to change that. So I want to make it a little bit darker, something like that. Let's Control Shift and select the principled BSDF, and that is much better. I think I want to play around with this a little bit more though. Just a tiny little change can really affect how the bread looks. So I'm just kind of playing around with the color ramp here to kind of change how much of the bread I want to look toasted. Let me just Control Shift and select that crust there, and that is looking very nice. So I'm going to press Control B and drag a box around the entire thing so I can preview that. So we now have some nice toasty pizza crust. So just press Control S again to save, and then let's click right here to select the pizza sauce. And you can see here is the sauce material that we created in the earlier part of the tutorial series. So now let's make the sauce texture. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's just click on the noise texture, and I can drop it down here. And then I'm also going to press Control T with the noise texture selected, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And again, I don't need the mapping node, so I can select it, and then I can press X to delete it. And let's just take the object, and we're going to plug that up to the vector of the noise texture, and then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. So then right here on the detail, I want to turn this all the way up to the max, which is 15, so it has a lot of detail. And let's zoom in here. I'm going to press Control B in the camera just to add a boundary. You can kind of see what that pizza sauce is looking like. So let's take the factor, and we're going to put that into the base color, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled BSDF to preview it. Now right now it is just kind of a white color, so I want to make it red. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's drop the color ramp right here between the noise texture and the principled. So then I'm going to click on the black tab, and on this black color I'm going to make this a very bright red color, so something like that. And the hex value that I'll be using for this red color is a hex value of A72400. And then I'm going to click on the white tab, and this is going to be a red color as well, but I'm going to make it very, very dark. And the hex value for this dark red is a hex value of 280200. All right, so that's looking much more like pizza sauce. Now I also want to add some subsurface to this because I want some light to go through it. So let's take the subsurface color, and I'm going to turn this to like a 0.2. Now you can see it's looking very white, and that is because the subsurface scattering color, if I just drag this out, the subsurface scattering color is white. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to make it kind of a red color, and then I'll make it a little bit darker. And again, for the subsurface color, if you want to use the same color that I'm using, then I'll be using a hex value of 970900. So now that is looking a lot more like pizza sauce. Now I also want it to be a bit darker, so let's take the specular value, and I'm going to turn this down to like a 0.3, so it's a bit darker. And turning the specular down also makes it less reflective. Now I also want to add some bump to this because right now it's very smooth, so let's take the factor, and we're going to plug this into the normal. And then I want to convert this to normal data, so let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the bump node. Let's click on the bump node, and I'm just going to drop it right in here between the noise texture and the normal. And then we need to convert the black and white data into normal data. So let's take the factor. We're going to be putting that into the height value, and that's going to convert it to normal data. Now the strength is way too strong, so I'm going to turn this way down to just like a 0.1, so it's not quite as strong. And then I do want to add another layer of bump. So let's click on this noise texture here and let's press Ctrl-Shift-D, and that will duplicate the noise texture but keep the object plugged up. And then I can Control-Shift and select the noise texture to preview it. Now on the scale here, I want to change this to like a 1.7. And then I want to turn the detail down because I want this noise texture to have much more bigger bumps. So I'm going to turn the detail down to just like a 3. So I'm now going to take this bump node right here. I'm going to press Shift-D to duplicate it, and let's drop it right here. So then the normal can go through the normal. So we can now take the factor and we can plug that into the height value of the bump. Now this bump right here, I'm going to turn the strength up to like a 0.3 so it's a bit stronger. So I can Control-Shift and select this bump. You can see this is just like a bunch of tiny little detail. Then I can Control-Shift, select this bump, and those are bigger bumps. So I can Control-Shift and select the principled shader, and you can see now we just have a little bit of bump there. And I do think the bump could just be a bit stronger. So let's take the strength value of the first bump, and I'm going to turn this to like a 0.25, just like a 0.25. And on the bump on this one, I think I'll change that to like a 0.4. So that's a bit better. Now the bump is a bit stronger. All right, so that is it for the pizza sauce material. So I'm now going to be creating the cheese material. So let's click on the cheese here, and you can see we've already added a material. So kind of like how we did with the pizza crust, I want little bits of the cheese to look like it's been a little bit toasted or maybe just very slightly burnt. So I'm going to press Shift-A. I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search here for a Voronoi texture. Let's click on the Voronoi texture, and I'm going to drop it up here. And then I can Control-Shift and select it to preview it. And then on the Voronoi texture, I'm also going to press Control-T, and that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And I can click on the mapping, and I can press X to delete it because we don't need the mapping node. And then I want to take the object, and I want to put that into the vector. And you can see when I do that, now the texture is placed on the object more evenly. And then also on the Voronoi texture, on the settings here, I want to click right here on this one here, and I want to change it to the Chebyshev, if that's how you pronounce it, the Chebyshev. And then let's also turn the scale down. So I'm going to turn the scale to like a 3.5. Now I want to use another texture to distort the Voronoi texture. So I can press Shift-A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's click on the noise texture, and I can put the noise texture in between the texture coordinate and the vector. And that way the noise texture is going to distort this Voronoi texture. And now we have this really cool texture here. And let's also turn the scale on this noise texture down to like a 4, and then I do want to give it lots of detail. So let's turn the detail all the way to the max, which is 15. So we have a lot of detail in there. Now I want to make this more contrasty because I don't want there to be burnt parts all over the cheese. I just want a few places here and there to look like they're just a little bit toasted. So I'm going to press Shift-A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. So we can use this color ramp to make it more contrasty. So I'll drop the color ramp right here. So I can now bring the black tab out a little bit, and then I'm going to bring the white tab way over and just bring that over. And you can see that the color ramp now is making that more contrasty. So where those darker parts are, that is where the cheese is going to look a little bit toasted. Now, because this procedural cheese material is going to get a little bit big, I do want to organize this very well. So I'm going to add a frame. So I'm going to press Shift-A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a frame. Let's click on the frame and drop it here. And then I can press B for the box select, just box select those nodes, and I can press G to grab, and let's stick them right there in the frame. And this is just a nice way to organize the nodes. And then also I can press the N key, and the N key is going to open up the side panel. And if you click right here on node, we can actually change the label of the frame. So I'm going to rename the label to burnt. Totally optional. You don't need to add the frame if you don't want to, but it's just a nice way to sort out the nodes. So I can now press the N key to close that. All right, so we now have our burnt map. So now I want to create the color. So I'm going to press Shift-A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture. Let's click on the Voronoi and drop it down here. And then I want to use the object coordinates. So with the Voronoi texture selected, I'm going to press Control-T. That's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping. And then I can just plug the object into the vector of the Voronoi, and I can click on the mapping and press X to delete it. And then I can Control-Shift and select the Voronoi to preview that. Now on the scale here on the Voronoi, I'm going to change this to like a 3.2. Just change that to like a 3.2. Now again, I want another texture to distort this Voronoi texture. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a noise texture. Let's click on the noise texture, and I'm going to drop it right here. And then on the detail, I'm going to turn this all the way up to the max, which is 15. And I do want this noise texture to be smaller. So let's take the scale value, and I'm going to turn the scale value to like a 1.4. Now I don't want the noise texture to distort the Voronoi a lot, I just want it to distort it a little bit. So I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a Mix RGB, and let's drop the Mix RGB right here. So then what I can do is I can plug the noise texture into color 2, and then we're going to take the original object coordinates and I can put that into color 1. And then I actually want to use the factor of the noise texture, so let's put the factor into color 2. So I can now play around with the factor, and you can see if I turn the factor all the way to 0, the noise texture isn't having any effect on the Voronoi, but if I turn the factor all the way up to 1, it's distorting it a lot. So I just want to turn the factor value to like a 0.4, so it's just distorting the Voronoi texture a little bit. And so what this texture is going to be is going to be some little red parts on the cheese. Now I want to make this more contrasty, so let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp right here, right after the Voronoi. Now to make it more contrasty, I can drag these values together. So I'm going to drag the black tab over a little bit, and then on the white tab, I'm going to drag this over quite a bit to somewhere like there. All right, so now just like I did with the pizza crust, I also want to use the pointiness value. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the geometry node, and let's click on the geometry node and put it right down here. And then to be able to preview it better, I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's put the color ramp right here. So then the pointiness can go into the color ramp, and then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. And you can see that the pointiness value is not very contrasty, so let's drag these values together, and then it's going to be more contrasty. I mean, you drag them really close to each other, now you can really start to see that. Now on this white tab right here, I want to click on this, and I'm going to change this to a very red color. So let's make it a very bright red color. And the hex value that I'll be using for this red color for the cheese is going to be E7 2B00 if you want to use the same color that I'm using. And then on this black tab right here, this is going to be the main cheese color. So I'm going to make this a very bright color, and then it's just going to be a little bit yellow. And the hex value for the main cheese color is going to be a hex value of FF D073, and then just kind of drag these together, kind of play around with it, because I do want to be able to see some of that red there, and that's going to make the cheese kind of look like it just came out of the oven, kind of make it look a little bit toasted and a little bit cooked, but I don't want there to be tons of red, so just kind of play around with that. So you can see some parts are a little bit more yellow, whereas some parts are a little bit more red. And I also really like that there's kind of red there where the cheese is kind of dribbling down. All right, so I now want to mix these two textures together. So you can select the color ramp, hold down the Shift key, and then select this other color ramp. And then I'm going to press Control 0. And Control 0 is going to add the Mix RGB. Let's bring the Mix RGB back here, and then I can just open it up. And also I want to bring the geometry node kind of up here, bring this up, and also I can put the color ramp right up here. All right, so I can bring the mix shader up here. Now, because this is just a black and white map, I'm actually using it as the factor. If I Control Shift and select this, you can see here are the little areas that I want to be more red. So let's take the color ramp top color, and we're going to put that into the factor. So I can now Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So you can see what this is doing. It's adding the cheese, which is this color right here, this color ramp. So that's like the main cheese color, but then it's adding these little areas here and there which are white. Now I don't want them to be white. I'm going to click on color 1, and I'm going to make this again a very red color and pretty bright. So now you can see we have this really nice map here with some little red bits and some yellow bits. So I want to put these all in a frame. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I can search for a frame. Let's click on the frame, and I can drop it here. So I can press A to deselect everything, press B for the box select, just box select all those nodes, and I can press G to grab and let's stick them right in there inside that frame. And then if you want to rename the frame, you can click on the frame, you can press the N key, and that's going to open up the side panel. And if you go to the node here on the label, I'm just going to rename this to like color. So now that frame is renamed to color. And then I can press N to close the side panel. All right, so I now want to add the burnt part of the cheese onto the main color of the cheese. So this is the color of the cheese and this is the burnt part. So just select the mix RGB, hold down the shift key and select the color ramp, and then you can press Control 0, and that is going to add the mix, and for some reason it added it way over here. Let's just drag this back over, and then I can click on this to open it up. Now again, this color ramp here is going to be the factor, so let's take the color 2 right here, we're going to unplug this, and we're going to plug this top color ramp into the factor, and then on this one right here, this mix, this is going to go into color 2. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now if you look up closely, you can see we now have those little white bits, but I don't want it to be white, I want it to look like it's burnt. So let's take color 1 and I'm going to make this fully black. And now we have some little burnt bits on the cheese. So now I can take this color and I can put it into the base color, and then I can Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview that. So there we go. Now we have this really nice cheese. The cheese is yellow and it has some orange and red bits, and then it has some burnt areas. Now those burnt areas are really strong. They're really black, but they're going to look less black when we turn up the subsurface scattering. So let's take the subsurface scattering, and I want to turn this up pretty high to like a 0.5, and that way it's going to allow lots of light to come through, because this is a very warm kind of toasted cheese, and so there is going to be a lot of subsurface scattering. And then on the subsurface color, the color that I want to come through is going to be again a very bright red color. So now if you zoom in there, those little parts that are burnt are now kind of a reddish color, and so they're not quite as strong, and that looks much better. Now I also want the cheese to be even more shiny, so let's take the roughness value and I'm going to turn this down to like a 0.3 so it's even more shiny. Alright, now the cheese is very smooth, and so I want to give it some bump. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search here, and I'm going to search for a bump node. Let's click on the bump node, and I can just drop it down here. So the first texture that I'm going to put into the bump is this noise texture right here, coming from the color. So I'm going to take the factor, and I'm going to plug this all the way up to the normal. And then I can click on this bump node, and I can just drop it right in here in the wire, and that's going to plug it up. And let's take the normal. We actually want to put this into the height value. So this noise texture is going to be plugged up into the height value, and that's going to convert it to normal data. And the normal can go into the normal. Now that is really strong. It's super bumpy, so I want to make it less strong. So let's take the strength value, and I'm going to turn this to like a 0.25, so it's much less strong. So now if you zoom in there, you can see the cheese is bumpy, but it's much more subtle. Now I also want this Voronoi texture to be contributing to the bump. So let's click on the bump, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it here. And then I can take the distance. We're going to take the distance from the Voronoi, and I can put that into the height value right there. So that way we can mix multiple bump maps together. Now I want to be able to control this texture better, because you can see it looks kind of weird. There almost are like some big cracks kind of going into the cheese. So let's press Shift A. I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp. Let's just click on this color ramp, and I'm going to drop it right in here between the Voronoi texture and that second bump. So drop it right there. And I can actually just stick it right here inside this color. So we're going to stick it inside that frame there. So then I can Control Shift and select it so we can preview what we're seeing. So we can actually preview what we're doing. So I can now take the white tab, and I want to drag this out. And as I drag it out, you can see now it's more and more subtle, and you're not able to see those areas quite as well. So now I can Control Shift and select this bump, and you can see those bits there that are going in are smaller. Now I want to make them less strong, so let's take the strength value, and I'm going to turn that down to just like a 0.1, so it's very subtle. But you can see there are those little bits there which are kind of going into the cheese. And then I can Control Shift and select the principled BSDF to preview that. And I also want to check mark the invert, and so if I check mark the invert, now it's going to be going out a little bit instead of going back in. So if I Control Shift and select this, now that looks like it's going up a little bit instead of going back in. So I'm going to check the invert, and then I'll Control Shift and select the principled BSDF. Alright, now I want to add one more layer of bump, and that is going to be the burnt areas, because where it's burnt, I want it to look a little bit more rough and bumping out. So let's take the bump node right here. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate this, and let's drop it here. And then I want to take this color ramp right here from the burnt part, and I'm going to take the color, and we're going to plug that into the height value of this third one. And then I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. Now you can't see it very well, and so I want to make it more strong. So let's turn the strength value up to just like a 0.2, so that's more strong. And then you can play around with the invert. If I turn the invert off, now it kind of looks like it's going back in. So I'm going to turn the invert on. I think the invert on looks a bit better. So I can now Control Shift and select the principled BSDF, and we can check out that final cheese material. So I'm just going to hop right back over here to the layout, and we can preview what we've created so far. So just press Control S again to save, and this is going to finish it up for part 2 of the Slice of Pizza Blender tutorial series. So again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've been enjoying this so far, and I hope you've been learning a lot. So in part 3, we are going to be creating the pepperoni and the olives, and we're going to be creating procedural materials for the pepperoni and the olives, and then we're going to place them on the pizza. I'll be uploading one part each day of the tutorial series, so when part 3 is released, it'll be right up there on the end screen, and also the link will be in the video description. So thank you for watching. I hope you've been enjoying this, and I will see you in part 3.